Wow, wow. Another legend alarm. Go outside. The advice of Paul Hawken, the writer of Drawdown, for anyone interested in the future of this planet, regeneration, carbon, biodiversity, investing, etc. Go outside for as long as possible. So I hope you're listening to this episode somewhere beautiful and full of life. And carbon is life and not the enemy. Join me in this fascinating and super wide-ranging conversation with the legend that Paul is. Activist, entrepreneur, he set up a food company and brand in the 70s. And of course, prolific writer. We talk about his journey and writing the books like Drawdown, Regeneration, and now Carbon, the Book of Life. And why people love Drawdown so much? Because it was full of lists and priorities, but that was not the point. Regeneration already came closer to the core what needs to happen. And then came Carbon, the Book of Life. And if you haven't listened to it or read it, it's chock full of nuggets of wisdom around the magical and magnificent role carbon plays in our lives. And yes, we have too much of it in the atmosphere, but also we have a lot of places it can go quickly and safely. We talk about his work with large food companies and the joy of bringing the executives to real regenerative farms. And then see the light bulbs go off. And of course, the panic in their eyes when they realize how far their value chains are removed from these real, deep regen farms. We cover food as medicine and how pissed Paul was with the healthcare and food system when he cured his lifelong asthma when he was 18-year-old. With food. He never could take a full breath of air until he was 18. And his excitement about the new generation and the new wave of scientists, and so much more. So enjoy, go outside, lay under an ancient tree, and soak it all in. This podcast is part of the Carbon series, supported by the OGCR project, which aims to create a trusted open source framework and make sure the benefits of carbon are shared across generations. This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, where we learn more on how to put money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities, and ecosystems, while making an appropriate and fair return. Welcome to another episode. Today with a legend, and I say that not lightly, activist, author, entrepreneur, environmentalist who started Drawdown in 2013, wrote Regeneration in 2021, and of course now Carbon, the Book of Life in 2025. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Nice to be here with you. I would love to actually live in the Netherlands. I love that country. I love my friends there. It's so sane compared to where I am right now.
Depending on the political week, it's interesting as well.
Let's say
we all live in, let's say, interesting places these days. And so it's a pleasure to discuss that on a global space. I've been out of the Netherlands for a while and also back a lot. And it's very interesting to see regeneration taking hold. I've been following that space for 15 years now, and it's becoming a thing, or it's a thing, which of course you partly helped create with writing such a coffee table book on the topic and then going a few levels deeper. But just to rewind, we always love to ask a personal question. And in this case, I'm not going to ask you to repeat your origin story in that sense. How did you get into environmentalism? But I want to focus more on the carbon piece. Why did you decide to write specifically a book on carbon and to double click on such a decisive word in that sense, which could also mean just stay away from it because you wrote a proper book on a word that we're fighting a war against, it seems. Like, why that? Why do you spend so many waking hours on that?
That's a good question. What I have seen, and I think you see it too, is that carbon's been fetishized and isolated as and even demeaned as a problem, as a bad boy, and if we can just fix carbon, then we're good to go as a civilization, as an economy. And to me, that's emblematic, is representative of the mindset that's caused the problem, which is to other, separate, make distinctions that aren't true. And so I felt in the process, carbon became something that we fought and that we removed, as if you could remove carbon. And using these verbs and other things to basically make a lot of money. And that's what companies are doing for insetting and basically carbon removal and all these terms, and then selling it to Microsoft and other companies to offset their emissions. So it's just, when we step back and look at it, it's hilarious, ridiculous and absurd. The math, the physics, all of it, the biology is just simply bizarre, really. But in writing Carbon, what I want to do is not to go on a rant like I'm doing right now about it.
Listeners, we get past the rant, don't worry.
Yeah, okay, let's stop the rant.
No, don't worry. It's fair enough because we've seen these funny pictures of the carbon funnel, like we only focus on that one piece, and I'm doing things with my hands now, nobody sees that. But I think many people get into this because of climate and carbon, and then slowly realize that's not, carbon is in the wrong place. It doesn't mean it's the enemy, and it's ridiculous because we're made of carbon and it's life. But that realization comes over time. Most of the people in this space are well-meaning and really think that what they're building is a genuinely piece of the puzzle. And then they realize, oh, oops, not using our shit. It's much bigger than that. When did that happen for you? Or when was that also a process over time? Or was it already embedded in Drawdown in that sense?
Yeah, well, I did Drawdown, but before I wrote the book, I had already decided to write Regeneration. And one of the rules about writing a good book is to write that book and not to think because you're an author, you can go blah, blah, and go into segue into other types of foci for a book. And so I wrote the outline for Regeneration before I wrote Drawdown. And I felt like with Drawdown, it was because there was an absence of people understanding what to do. That was the thing. What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And it was really hilariously symbolized by 2015, the Conference of the Parties in Paris. And that was the big one in terms of making pledges and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, my staff went there, and we went around to the blue zone and green zone, but mostly the blue zone, and asked people, what are the top 5 solutions to reversing global warming? Simple question. Nobody can answer it. And those who tried answered it wrong. There was nobody there. And oftentimes they would say, oh, let's see, solar and recycling. They got that too. And then they'd look at a thing and they got lost. They wouldn't understand. There wasn't electric cars then and so forth. And that was stunning. That meant why we did Drawdown. Okay, I did it because there's a whole bunch of solutions out there and so forth. But at the same time, I knew that really looking at the atmosphere that way was still part of the problem, that we're going to draw down carbon and return it to its source in some gaseous form. And that's why Regeneration was created, yeah.
And then after Regeneration, what felt unanswered or what felt unspoken about enough to demand another book, to demand a proper book, diving really deep into the C word?
Drawdown appealed to people's idea of a shopping list of here's what to do and numbers, percentages, and we got this. And Regeneration, it's interesting about the 2 books because I would say Drawdown sold maybe 5 times as many books as Regeneration. What Regeneration did not have is listing, ranking, percentages, and of course, how could you? But Drawdown did, and because there was much talk then and now, of course, about net zero 2050 being the goal, which is also, by the way, with all due respect, a completely absurd goal, which is unattainable. But that was the focus. And for the IPCC, obviously for the Conference of the Parties, and then businesses began to get on board and say we have to do our part. And so it was always into measurement, metrics, how much, where, all that sort of stuff, which really appealed to a technocratic society, right? But life is not a technocrat. And so the biosphere creates the atmosphere. And so the interactions and the intricacy of those interactions is just extraordinary science and extraordinary exploration, extraordinary understanding that goes back also thousands of years, but also is really how I see the science I'm looking at. I see science really blooming in a new way. Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with understanding what we don't know as opposed to trying to pin something down and we know this. And I love, you mentioned Toby Cares, but I love the scientists and many others and so forth who are revealing, Zoe Slanger in her book, The Light Eaters, and the botanist she interviewed, about how the intricacy and...
Just finished The Light Eaters, by the way. It's
the complexity of the world is astonishing and beautiful, as opposed to it's a thing that we got to fix. Yeah.
And does that make you optimistic? There seems to be this whole wave of science almost catching up to the indigenous worlds, catching up what we knew or know and proving. I remember a book, it's a couple of years ago, on trees from an Irish author and scientist that I moved to Canada, but she was the last one that got all the traditional indigenous knowledge of Ireland. And then proved her whole career was basically proving out what she learned from the elders there, and then making sure she could write peer-reviewed papers on them. Nothing to say that's easy, by the way. But do you see that wave? Is there a step change? Is there, you say, blooming? Is that something of the last couple of years? What do you see as you've been so close to, let's say, the carbon and living world science over the last couple of years?
Yeah, this is a guess. Okay, a guess is that my daughter got her PhD at Yale. She's a scientist. And so I actually gave a commencement speech at Yale. And so what I see is younger scientists, we're creating them all the time, right? That's what the schools do, from Oxford, Cambridge, Yale, whatever. But they have been basically inundated with science, papers, peer review, the whole process of getting science basically sanctioned as being true by other scientists, usually scientists who are older and very, very committed to paradigmatic ways of thinking about whatever the subject is. And what I see is young people coming in and looking at the world, looking at the crises we face, the thinking and the rhetoric that comes at us about it, and saying, this isn't interesting to me. What's interesting to me is X, Y, Z, whatever, and looking at it with new eyes. I think what's happening is that the methodology of science in terms of observation, that part of it, observation, acute observation. Darwin did it, for goodness sakes, with plants. So this is not a new thing. And then really the interrelationship of the understanding that people who have lived here for thousands of years, we call them indigenous, that's a great word, and because it means original inhabitant, by the way, so that's a good word and a good thing. And actually their understanding and their knowledge combined with the methodology or the rigor of Western science, if you will, is creating the observations that are in Carbon, the book, which is wow. And so I just feel that we need a sense of wonder instead of a sense of doom. The facts are the facts about what's happening in terms of global heating, but almost all the information that comes out is like things are getting worse. And if you measure it just from that point of view, using those parameters, no question, I agree. But those parameters are very narrow.
And I think what it does to me, but I'm curious what it does to you, is all this, the immense speed of regeneration as well. If nature does its work, which is not the right terminology, but if we allow it, if we facilitate, and we have an active role, and we are a keystone species and quite an impactful one negatively at the moment, but that doesn't mean we cannot take a positive one, and we have done that in the past. The speed is quite astonishing. So yeah, we're deep, we're 10-0 behind or more. If we want to do a match one, at least we're severely degraded, let's say. But we also have seen a lot of examples of in super fast recovery or super fast regeneration to relatively health. And as soon as we start to understand the science behind that more and more, it means we might be able to replicate it, which of course is super difficult because you're not going to bring a landscape to a lab. But does it give you hope looking deep into that science of regeneration, basically?
It brings me a lot of delight. Hope is not a word that I'm in favor of. Huh?
Delight is nice as well.
Oh, delight and wonder and curiosity and lots of beautiful emotions. Hope to me, just so I can digress a little bit, when I was in my Buddhist training and in both here and in Japan, my teachers were very dismissive of hope. And I said, why? And they said, because it depends on fear. And why would you be hopeful if it wasn't something you didn't want to happen? What are you hopeful about? What's the hope about? It's always about something. What? And so what they encourage us to be is to be fearless, not hopeful. That's, again, go upstream. What's the problem? Fear. It's not that people's concerns are irrational. They're irrational. But then how do you incorporate it, integrate that, and then lead a life of meaning? And you don't do it by being hopeful. You do it by being fearless. And that means...
And do stuff.
And do stuff that will fail. Do stuff where you'll be criticized. Do stuff that may put you in opposition to the conventional thinking, all that sort of stuff. That's courage. That's what we need right now. We have it. It's there. It's happening everywhere in the world, but as opposed to being hopeful. So just a digression on that word. I think that people is makes me delighted. And what I see every day for me, I'm researching a new book. Every day is really about, wow. And as opposed to, oh my God, I read that stuff too, by the way. We talked about that. Oh, shit. He said what? He did what? Yeah, it is what it is. And we're going into a proto-fascist era. And we've done it before, we being the Northern European countries and the United States and Japan, that whole axis. But, so it's happened before. My wife's Italian. They go back to Mussolini and what that was like during the war. That's a horrible thing, but there is something much deeper, more profound occurring at the same time, which is, I think, the discovery of our species, Homo sapiens, that we're inhabitants. This is our home. And that in terms of regeneration, we are innately regenerative every millisecond, okay, all our cells in our body. But in terms of the earth itself, what we can do as species is to create the conditions for regeneration. We can't regenerate a deer, a forest, an ocean, a wetland. We can't do that. We can create the conditions for it to regenerate. And so even in agriculture, maybe we'll get to talk about food, this idea that, and we can talk about that. People are claiming, even Pepsi-Cola, for example, we do regenerative corn, regenerative this, and you just want to go, oh my God, that's just crazy. So that word has now been bastardized as, and I call it a weasel word. A weasel in English is, I shouldn't say it. Weasels are really great creatures. But the point being, sustainability is a weasel word. Regenerative now is a weasel word. It has no meaning, because it means anything to anybody whenever they want to use it. So that's not a good word. And so we'll talk about it, and that's what we're doing. But I just want to say that I've seen regeneration when I started thinking about it in 2015 and doing the book and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't really prominent as a term at all. And it's become prominent, become really vastly misused by business for sure, but also in many other aspects.
And it's definitely, let's say, has seen a rise in regen washing or whatever we want to call that, but that's happening absolutely. And at the same time, it's drawing in people somehow from different angles, I keep calling them like they're being bitten by the soil bug somehow. It could be health, like them, or people in their family. It's a very common angle. It could be carbon, like climate change and discovering that there used to be a lot more carbon in the soil and in living ecosystems. It could be water, it could be biodiversity, it could be birds in general, and like whatever angle on inequality, land ownership, of course, is a big one, like whatever. But a lot of people are starting to be drawn, it seems, to the food system or the land use system, let's say, and sea as well, but slightly less, or it seems less so in terms of oceans. And they all look for that connection with, and I know like the separation, which Charles Eisenstein writes about a lot, like somehow food and agriculture feels that the easiest way of reconnecting with nature, because you interact with it so much as a farmer, as a gardener, as anything. You are like, it's impossible not to be humble almost, especially if you're going the regen path in terms of practices, etc. Like you're facilitating, literally facilitating. And the great farmers I know are more humbled now than they were a couple of years ago, because they discovered how much they don't know. For anyone out there not going deeper into gardening, agriculture, and food, how do we not get them, because that's not the right term, but realize they're part of nature? It seems such a big and fundamental switch. And yes, you can take mushrooms and you can do all kinds of things, or meditate a long time. But what are pathways you've seen as successful ones for people to almost make that switch or come to that realization? And from that moment on, it should be facilitation and not domination?
The first thing is get out of your head and go outside and stay outside. Not just fundamentally. You look at Barry Lopez, the great writers, about nature, Gary Snyder, I can name them all. They spent a lot of time outside. And they didn't spend time they weren't on screens. And so we are very much accustomed to getting a lot of information, even our quasi-experience, not really, through screens, through vicariously, through others, people's eyes and experiences. And nothing substitutes for going outside and being outside. And what I discovered young is I didn't know what the hell was going on outside. That was really, so the back story to that is that I lived in a home which was not a home. It was not safe to live in it. It was not a safe place. Inside was not safe. It was a bad place to live. And so I went outside and stayed there as much as I could. And where inside the refrigerator, this is where this is. You know how you can master the inside of a home really quickly if you're 3-4 years old. But you won't master the outside if you live for 3 or 4 generations. And so it's a real figure ground shift in terms of one's sense of understanding and knowing, but at the same time, it's one of just like endless fascination. And so for me, although I'm not a botanist, not a biologist, I didn't study that in college, I'm not those things, but I am curious. And always have been from a very early age. So a lot of the carbon, certainly that, but a lot of my writing in Regeneration too comes from curiosity, both experiential, from actually reading, from meeting and being taught by great people like Charlie Massey in Australia in terms of regenerative agriculture. There's so many. And so for me, I'm a collator. I gather, just like you gather acorns if you're a squirrel in the fall. I gather information and connections and try to put it together in such a way that people will turn the page. People ask me, what makes a good book? I said, there's only one thing that makes a good book, turn the page. If you don't want to turn the page, it's not a good book. And so whether it's this or that, I'm always thinking about the reader as well. And I just feel like if anything that deserves a page turn is the living world. It's so extraordinary, beautiful. We've said this already, but exposure to that gives one a very different sense of what's possible. Also gives you a sense of how tragic it is that we're using things like, AI is okay, it's going to figure out about what we do about forests and soil and land and wetlands, and AI is coming to rescue us from climate change, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, really. And so all my experiences really about carbon and so forth really come from being a farmer, from starting a food company that depended entirely on, at that time, organically grown food, as the term was used, and meeting farmers and walking the land with them and hearing their really generational wisdom about what they had learned, being the farmer on the same land, being the son of the father, of the grandfather, of the great-grandfather, that generational wisdom that had passed down to them. So that's where this comes from me. And so when I think of like people today, and I realize the constant urbanization of the world really forfends against that, really prevents people from having those kind of experiences. I'm so fortunate, the ones I had. And so anytime I'm writing, Colin, I'm trying to pique people's curiosity, or really, I didn't know that, and I could say, either did I, and so that's why I'm sharing it with you, as opposed to being didactic. And I know you don't listen up, which is so many books come out about climate, which is I'm the expert, and I'm not the expert. I'm the curious little boy who wants to share.
And how did it land? Compared to the other books you mentioned, you want to write a page turner, literally. You want to get people in and then hopefully get them out after they're done with whatever pages they need. You said Regeneration sold a lot less because maybe there weren't lists. Carbon definitely doesn't have any lists in them. Or let's do this and this now. How has been the reception from your audience? The responses you get? Are people moved by it? Because that's, I think, at the end, as a writer, you want. Also in places maybe they're not so common for a book like this to land. Like how's Carbon been landing since it came out?
It's the best book I've ever written. It's so far the lowest sales. It's in 8 languages, but already. So it seems to have been picked up more quickly than other books in terms of other countries. But I won't name the countries. But I think the thing about going back to Drawdown had high sales because it had these ranking. And there was the birth of ESG, which is another crazy term, but by businesses committing to ESG. And so businesses loved the book because it was calibrated, it was numerical, there was lists, there was ranking.
To people, yeah.
Yeah, they love that. Regeneration didn't have that. It couldn't. And so I think that required a lot more involvement with the book, the content. And it said things like, really went after the food industry, went after war, said the biggest industry, the most destructive industry in the world today is war. But it's close with agriculture. Hard to say which is worse. It took on things that were being occluded, to build out climate and net zero and so forth. And I was saying, what about the 100 and I don't know how many was 30 standing armies and just ridiculous kind of things that we're doing. And you can see it now with the Venezuela kidnapping of Maduro in Venezuela. You see what the United States had to get one person, $1 billion there, that $1 billion operation. So I think that Carbon for me was really just a sharing about how to see the world differently. And that's why there's a chapter called Bucky and Bing, and it's about Buckminster Fuller and Ling Bing Hu. But the reason I paired them together, because they're incredible inventors, very different in terms of what they invented. And obviously Buckminster Fuller is past, but it all started with how they saw the world. They just saw the world differently. The same things that you and I see, they saw with a different lens, which is available to all of us. We can all do that. And that's why I said, go outside and look, see and what happened with both scientists, by the way, Ling Bing Hu and Buckminster Fuller, is what they saw made them curious, and they realized they didn't know something. They couldn't understand something. And so their inventions derive from why are bubbles round? How many billions of people had seen bubbles before Buckminster Fuller and didn't ask the question? Maybe they asked the question, but that's it. They're, I wonder why. And then forgot about it. He didn't forget about it. And said, why are they round? And that was really the seed source of all, it was obviously the domes, but so much of his understanding came from asking that simple question. And so, again, you're a Buckminster Fuller, you are a Ling Bing Hu, you are somebody, who outside can look and see and ask a question, like, how does that work? Or why are all the birds drunk on pyracanthus? And why do they eat it? And are they inebriated just like we get inebriated? I mean, it's just these things, and that is a world that's so different than the world that we are engaging in right now, which is a world of enormous connectivity, but it's an artificial world of electrons going through screens and channels and all this sort of stuff, and we're connecting that way. But there's a connection that we all need more of, and in that connection, take our children, take our classes. There's forest schools now. I don't know if you have them there. They don't have any classroom at all. They have tarps so the kids don't get rained on, but they never go inside, and they don't use a textbook. And these kids are amazing. They know more binomials by the time they're 8 years old than I'll know in my whole life. And identification and understanding and observation and so forth. That's the school of regeneration. That's the school that creates extraordinary scientists that we have today.
And what would you say to the listeners, let's say, in the financial world, which of course has all the tensions of being extractive, but also a lot of resources could be put to work in agroforestry systems and restoring and regenerating. And it always feels, and with the podcast, we're always dancing between, let's say, the permaculture garden and the City of London, to put it very black and white. If there was one message you would like to give to a more financially focused, that are either managing their own money or other people's money, pension funds, etc., to look at regeneration and to look at carbon differently, what would be that seed you would like to plant to something? Because let's say I'd like to ask this question, we do it in a theater, on stage, of course, a lot of nice imagery, people are very moved, people forget things. The next day they're at the office, they are at their desk, they open the laptop or whatever, hopefully outside, but let's see. What should they remember from that evening? And should they remember from the conversations we had? What is the seed you would like to plant in more the finance-minded or focused people?
Well, they're going to have to understand at some point that they are involved with an economic system, a capitalist system that depends entirely on extraction and destruction. It always has from the very outset, no change. And that businesses have tried to figure out, I think some people are very sincere. Some businesses are afraid if they don't do things and say things and sequester carbon or do whatever, that they will lose consumer approval. In other words, that they'll be censured in some way, or that family funds and other sources of capital won't invest in their stock, won't buy their stock. They have to step back and look at the system, because the system creates the conditions for destruction. And trying to patch that up with regeneration or this and that is a nice thing unto itself, but the system itself simply grows. And Microsoft is the biggest purchaser of carbon credits in the world. Their biggest client is oil companies. Okay. So
you buy a lot of credits, yeah.
Yeah, how can you buy a credit for the Permian Basin? So I'm not a big fan of big business trying to make themselves look like they're helping.
And smaller businesses, like what are you on the mycelium side, on food as medicine, food company, you've been a food company entrepreneur. Today, what do you see? I think the stock market is its own beast in that sense. But
right.
Economic activity, not necessarily hyper-capitalist growth focused, has a lot of energy behind it, let's say, and a lot of interest. And even most farms are small or medium-sized company in that sense. What do you see there?
You have to really break it down from big food companies and then big farms, and then let's call them family farms, for lack of a better term, but tiers of agriculture. And I was consulting with a company, and they do a lot of reporting on carbon and setting. And I looked at their verifiers, all the companies that verify their carbon removal and so forth. And I just went over them. There's 8 or 9 of them. And what I pointed out is they all allow glyphosate, none of them prohibit chemicals, and they all say they're supporting regenerative agriculture. And I'm going, wow, I don't think
two cover crops or something.
Yeah, they do cover crop, and then they put an herbicide on it, and we're good to go. And they can measure some differential in terms of carbon in the soil, or if they measure at the right time. So I feel like the big food companies are at sea, as an English word, in other words, out to sea, and struggling because big food companies buy from big producers and big farms and all that sort of stuff, so it goes up and down. And there isn't a way to get from the mindset of agriculture to the mindset of regeneration without understanding that modern agriculture was about feeding the plants. Okay? That's what Haber-Bosch's discovery of cheap, affordable nitrogen did. It wasn't feeding the soil, it was feeding the plant. And so every agriculture innovation and then chemical and technique and so forth is all about the plant. More plants, stronger plants, healthier plants, get rid of and they're not really healthier because they're subject to infestation, to insects. Oh, we need pesticides then, we need this, we need that. Okay. Soil's degenerating, so now we need things to help the soil, all that sort of stuff. But it's not the soil, it's really the plant. And so regeneration is just a figure ground shift, which is it's all about the soil. All about the soil. And to understand the soil as an ecosystem as complex as anything we know of on Earth, that literally all life comes from the soil. Not some life, not our food, that too, but all life on Earth comes from that thin mantle of soil Okay, and always has. Except we go back 400 or 500 million years into the oceans. But in terms of animals, habitat, people, insects, pollinators, etc., it all comes from the soil. So really our focus in regeneration has to be on the soil. And then it's really about how do we create the conditions again for soil to be regenerate and thrive and grow. And again, it's not like we will ever know what's going on down there. It's so intricate and beautifully complex, but we know a lot now. And we know what creates healthy soil and what does not. And so to me, regenerative agriculture is making that transition from agricultural techniques that did produce a lot. They were bountiful in one sense at the expense of the soil. And so we're reaching that end of the road, which is, wait a minute, we need more food, and our oceans are getting poisoned by runoff and all the symptoms. Workers are getting poisoned by pesticides and herbicides. We're taking into consideration all that, but what I'm trying to do, and I work with big food companies, I do, and what I'm saying is that basically, if you don't shift, you're not going to have a food supply. You're not.
How does that land? Has that changed? Sorry to interrupt, but like, you're called into big food companies. For sure, you tell them, I'm not going to bring you a very popular message. Small changes are not going to be enough here. This is a radical shift in focus. You might not be able to make that shift, just as energy companies are not making the renewable energy shift necessarily. How does that, and has that changed over the last years? I see more shift and more, it's less of a CSR discussion, more CFO now because of the supply chain issues and the failing agriculture system. But what have you seen from inside some of these bigger ones?
You're seeing, a big company has a lot of different departments and people and responsibilities.
Are you talking to procurement and to people that are making real business decisions, or
talking to CEOs, and then
what's their feeling?
They're all struggling because they have a huge company, and so there's no CEO who doesn't. But what I'm talking about is, forget the word regeneration, just put it aside. You're the CEO, it's a big company, you have shareholders, you have workers, and you want to focus on resilience and pragmatism. You want to be practical, and you want to create a system that's resilient in the face of what's happening, coming at us in terms of climate, weather. And you have no control over that whatsoever, about water and about heating and about drought and about floods and atmospheric concentration of water, by the way. And so you have no control, and you will not have any control as long as you're CEO. So let's put that aside. What do you do on the land in such a way to create responsiveness from the soil and from the soil in its manifestation, which includes, of course, canopies and other plants and insects and creatures. But what can you do to move towards one where, you're creating a hydrosphere? Because you can't control the atmosphere, but you can control the hydrosphere. And the hydrosphere is at 10, 20 feet above the soil, above the land, which is cooled by moisture. And that you want moisture in the soil, much more moisture, and you want that moisture going out of the soil to cool a canopy. If there's no canopy, then it's safer for your workers perhaps, but you haven't really closed the loop. And so when we think of soil, we think of it as 99 people out of 100 see soil, they'll see something dark or brown or black and crumbly, and that's soil. Soil has always been symbiotic with a canopy, plants, weeds, we call them weeds, grasses, whatever, it can be trees, can be brush, can be this and so forth. And that relationship between the soil, if you will, and that canopy is the core of regeneration. Because what's happening is this idea of insetting and removal, it's hysterically funny. Yes, you want more carbon in the soil because it's a sign of life. Of course, it's a measurement of how much life in the soil. But actually, carbon is a cycle. It's supposed to go out of the soil and back in. It's a cycle. It's not just fixed down there and say, stay there, don't go anywhere, we're going to add more carbon. That, again, is such a mechanistic, stupid mindset. And so the soil is always breathing gas, carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide is down there to make nutrients available, nitrogen, phosphorus, so forth. And it goes out as a gas, and it wants to be captured by the canopy. Okay, because plants eat carbon dioxide. That's what they eat. That's their food. And so then those plants actually grow more, send roots down more, and now you have symbiosis in the soil and the plant world, but not necessarily the crops you're going to grow. That will happen too, but on this canopy. And then you grow in the canopy with other plants and so forth, as opposed to isolation, as we know, with industrial agriculture. That makes sense?
How does that land? Absolutely. No, we focus a lot with the podcast, and it's one of my pet peeves, on water and on the small water cycle and on the interaction between living landscapes and living farms and living fields, all the way down to living square meters. And the meters more than that, above that, in terms of the air column, let's say, and which absolutely fascinates me because it gives you a lot of agency and a lot of, yes, you cannot control the weather, but you can definitely influence a lot what happens around above the farm to a certain extent. The bigger you are, of course, the more influence you have and the more life you have, the more that happens. But I've noticed that's a huge, like as soon as you say water to someone in food space, everybody thinks of irrigation. How does that land when you say that? And nobody thinks of the interaction between vapor going up and down and different molecules and triggering rain and triggering forest, triggering the rain season and all of that. That concept of actually water is potentially more interesting than carbon. How does it land at a CEO of a food company?
With difficulty, because they're very well trained in getting the foodstuffs that they want all over the world in some cases, and have systems and people, really good people, nice people, caring people, who basically facilitate that process, the agriculture, that if it's being dried, if it's being this, it's being harvested, all that sort of stuff, and packaged and this and that and sent and remanufactured into something. Okay, so they do that really well, and that's a system, and it's a complicated system, and there's always things that can go wrong within that system, and they're very, obviously they wouldn't be where they are if they weren't experts and weren't good at hiring experts and managing them and to do this all over the world. Okay. So what I do is say, okay, what I'm doing is saying, yeah, okay, but that has a half-life. That's not going to keep working, given the fact that the climate models all broke in 24. We don't know why now the heating is increasing from a model that worked for 20 years. We're seeing as every tenth of a degree centigrade, the temperature goes up and so forth. There's 1% more water. Now there's 10% more water than there was 50 years ago in the atmosphere. What happens? It comes down and you have these floods, in other words, and you eroding soil. Or, interestingly, when there's more water in the atmosphere, which there is, it creates droughts, which is counterintuitive. So you get very dry periods and you get too much water too soon, and rather than being absorbed by the land, repels it because it's too much too soon. And then you get erosion, you get floods, you get river channels that have been blown away, that have been around there for hundreds of years. So what I'm saying to them and so forth is, let me take you to, I call them climate farmscapes. I don't use the word regeneration, but they love the word climate. But anyway, farmscapes. I'm going to take you to the farmers who know. And they'll tell you the story. They'll tell you what they do, because you can't say, oh, this works on Australia, New Zealand, Chile, France, and Japan. One size fits all. It does not. And the crops, the people, the soil, the moisture, the atmosphere, the heating, all those things are different. And to actually take their top agricultural people and them, if possible.
That must be so fun.
Yeah, and say, here, I'm just the go-between. I know this person, and they've done it for 9 years. They made the transition. They're a father, son. It was difficult. They'd be the first to tell you. Even got basically disapproval from their neighbors. They were gossiped about. And I've always said in the United States, I don't know about other places.
Everywhere.
It's the coffee shop is the most difficult part for the farmers when they're making a change, to be shunned in the coffee shop, which they go to every morning in these little towns.
Or their children are no longer invited for soccer practice or selected for the team.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. The ostracization, because it threatens they feel it as a threat. But to take them to meet them and then listen to the learning, whether it's in the mountains or whether it's on the plains or whether it's in cold environments or highly humid environments, different crops, different people, different farmers, and so forth, and say, That's it. This is what they know. They've created the conditions for healthy crops that actually do not depend on any external inputs. That's so shocking to them that a 8,000 acre, 800, 500 acre farm could have no inputs, except it does have an output. It's called the crop, the seeds or grains or the vegetables. And that's just paradigmatically like astonishing. And
then what happens? Like, how does, the shock is one, shock and all, but then how do they internalize? And then how does that?
I don't know. I'm in the process of doing that. So come back to me and I'll report to you.
Please do, because I think many listeners have those experiences, because many people in the food system don't visit farms, first of all, and definitely don't visit advanced farms at all, or future-proof, or climate-scape, whatever we want to call them. Real regeneration. I don't care about the term agroecology. As long as you go there, you're like, oh, wow. And I've seen it multiple times, like very high people in the financial world, the food financial world, and the food system, and they are shocked of what is possible, because a lot of things they thought were not possible actually are, like growing food with very little input, or very advanced compost systems at very large scales, like actually proper, not just a half an acre market garden that we all know. But then translating that into action, because there's another, like a lot of these food companies are super dependent on very cheap ingredients coming from very chemical value chains and very unhealthy value chains, which makes us all sick, because that's the food, unfortunately.
Right.
So switching that's such a monumental, and consumers are starting to ask a lot of questions about ingredients. And so they're in trouble not only because of weather, but they're also in trouble because of actually market share that's going down, and people picking other things and going deep on YouTube on health and food and discovering what kind of crap we've been eating. And so there's a dual push, but then the question is, okay, what's the action? Okay, are we going to set up a food as medicine brand, or what are we going to do with our current situation once we've seen the sort of ideal paradise situation?
Boy, yeah, I brought up a whole bunch of things that I deal with.
I tend to do that. Sorry.
Yeah. I remember one meeting, this is a big food company, and I was with a lot of executives and so forth and scientists, and I mentioned that regeneratively, really healthy soils produce plants with different nutritional profiles. In other words, it's talking about nutrition, not just about function or production. And boy, one scientist just said, just tore into me and said, you probably believe in the tooth fairy too, right? And it was a belief system. I know, it was
like
really
an attack.
Yeah, it was a total attack. And in fact, his expertise was water and nothing to do with agriculture. And I said, and I laughed it off and so forth. I didn't take offense, but I did mention the fact that the Rockefeller Institute has a whole food program, and they're studying nutrition. And I was talking to them not so long ago, and the gentleman, Roy Steiner, was saying chard has actually about 10,000 ingredients. Chard. He said kale has about the same number of ingredients. Okay. He said there's a 10% overlap. In other words, we don't even know what we're eating. No. And we don't know. Obviously, most of those ingredients are in very small amounts, but the plant thinks they're all important. So we don't even know what's in our food and what constitutes nourishment, really. And so we're at the threshold of discovery here. Again, not just, I don't want to look at it as ignorance. I want to look at it as discovery, which is we have, I don't know what you have, but we have the sort of periodic table of diet, what people should eat, and this and that. And it's like
we had five parts, like it was a circle.
Yeah, you had five. We had a pyramid that's being changed by Maha and Robert Kennedy.
It's now upside down. Yeah, I saw something.
But that's both miss the point.
At least there's a discussion, but at least there's I think even the simple notion of a tomato is not a tomato and a kale is not a kale. It really depends, of course, on seeds. And on how it's grown. It's not just 5% more, 10% more. No, there's a massive, like we see now research. We had Herb Young on citrus, ex-Bayer scientist, by the way. He's now in his retirement growing citrus, and his citrus got lab tested 8 times, like nutrient dense, like 8x, not 10% or 15. Like it's another product. Like you don't even call it the same. But that notion that growing is so fundamentally important on the quality is still very, I keep shouting it on every episode, but like very little known that it really matters how you grow. We know it when we taste it, like, oh, this tomato, yeah, it's different. But it ends there. We know it with wine maybe, and maybe coffee to a certain extent now with the whole coffee boom. But that's it. And that notion of it really matters where your milk, like how your milk was grown or how your tomato, there's a fundamental, and all those elements are important, and they might be important for your brain function, or they might be important for your children. And so I think that notion is still, it's in our little circle. Yeah, of course, What Your Food Ate. We all read the book of Anne Bickley and David Montgomery, but it still surprises me how many people in the food space just completely dismiss it, like the water guy you talked to. Like, of course, no, but it's tomato, it's all the same. And it's completely bogus, but we haven't really caught up in terms of public knowledge on that at all, that it can make you feel really shitty or very good compared to how it was grown.
By the way, just a digression, I would love to have the name of that person from Bayer who is growing citrus.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Herb Young. I will send it to you.
Okay, great. How do you spell his surname?
Just like young person, I think.
Okay.
Let me think.
Okay.
Young.
Yeah.
And it's called Squeeze Citrus. I will put it also down.
Because it's interesting, because the company I work with and consult with called Oath Soil Life is about amazing microbial mixture. And not just microbes, but developed over 20 years and so forth. It has fantastic effects and impacts on everything, whether it's corn, wheat, rice, coffee, or whatever. And very quick, too, within one growing cycle. But the person who's coming to lead the company is ex-Bayer. And I can't speak for him, but I think his thing is I can't get out of here fast enough.
And with her, because he was saying, we had a long conversation on it on the podcast, and even my ex-colleagues now think I'm crazy. They come to the farm and they say, oh, the plants look a bit like this. Let's add something. Let's do something. Let's make them grow fast. He said, of course they grow slower. This is only the third year. Citrus in terms of production is not, because he did a conventional plot as well, just to compare. But he said, it's just another world. Like, I'm trying to grow everything. I'm trying to... But he said, we really thought in Bayer and other places, we really thought we are saving the world and feeding the world.
Yeah.
And he said, we never got exposed to soil life. He retired and wanted to grow citrus and said, let's do it organic because there might be a premium. That was his. And then he went down the rabbit hole of John Kemp's podcast. And he said, for a year, I listened to everything. I read everything. And then I planted my first tree. But I went through that learning. It took a year. He said, it took a year for me to unlearn and relearn for my 37 years of Bayer. Which I really thought I was doing a good thing there, but I just never got exposed to soil as alive.
Of course, think of a conventional school system or whatever that is. Yeah. No, just a children's school, kindergarten, first and second grade, all the way through ninth grade. And so all the teachers think they're doing a good job. Okay, they wouldn't be there. I mean, all of them, but let's say they do. And the principal and this and that and so forth. And they're teaching the children bullshit, basically, in my opinion. Because they don't know that.
I need to go to school this year. Don't tell me these things, Paul. But yeah.
Yeah, no, but which school? Which teachers?
Yes.
That's the question. There's great schools out there. Don't get me wrong. I sent all my kids to Waldorf schools because just for that reason. I want them to be schooled and be with their classmates. But I'm just saying, Bayer's the same thing, which is all the people that are thinking they're doing a good thing because they've taught, they're making things grow, they're protecting the plants from being eaten up by insects. Feeding the world, destroying pollinators, right and left.
Pests. They're called pests.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I got the see.
But I'm always curious what they feed their children. Like, I would love to look in the fridge of Bayer executives just to see what they eat with what they know, or any other Syngenta. This is not to pick on, but I'm just curious. Like, if you're that deep, do you drink the Kool-Aid or no? Or spray it. I don't know. Anyway,
there's a CEO of a very big company who I got to know over years, and he got it. But the company he was the CEO of came out with a new cereal, which was just absurd, nutritionally absurd, and a lot of people inside were upset about it, and people were defending it inside. And I was talking to him about it. He said he was upset about it. And he said, I had to put it on I took a box home, very top shelf so my daughter wouldn't see it. That's the
that says
system.
it all.
That's the system we're
Yeah,
in.
that's the system of
Yeah.
shareholder three.
Yeah, the sun's coming up. Yeah. Which goes to what you're doing here, and I'm really in admiration and so forth. This whole system is in ferment. It's not fixed anymore, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of queries, a lot of problems, and a lot of externalities. And the externalities are both the weather, and the other externality is people. Just saying, no, I don't want that, I won't buy that. Or people realizing that their health and what they've been eating and drinking has a profound effect on their brain, their thinking, their nervous system, their internal organs, and their life longevity. Other than that, it's fine. So you're seeing this awakening of people realizing that the food system they've taken for granted and were sold advertisements and all that sort of stuff, nonsense, nutrition, is in question. And so it's really a beautiful time. And I think your podcast is spot on in terms of really focusing on that, because it's really the source of so much else. We have literally a $5 trillion healthcare system in the United States. It's the third biggest country in the world, if it stood alone, third biggest country in the world. And it is so absurd. And if you watch television, which I do sometimes, and
For
usually
research, right? Yeah.
right, CNN, and then you see these drug advertisements, and then you say, "I've never heard of that disease. I've really never, and I'm not illiterate there." And then here's the drug for it, and here's the side effects. By the way, you have to name the side effects and contraindications if you experience this. And it's just like a horror show of potential side effects. And why would they be advertising on CNN if there wasn't a big market for it? There is, from a disease you and I have never heard of. That's where we are. $5 trillion a year in the United States alone. Yeah.
And that's actually, a lot of people are arguing in the regeneration space, we need to go after the health angle. That's because we can talk about soil carbon and biodiversity and pollinators. There's a small group that really cares about it. But health seems to be a bigger issue for more people and or their family. And maybe selfishness, like that moves people more than, let's say, the ecosystem they're part of. And there are a lot of opportunities there. There are a lot of, food is a huge lever in health, 70-80% depending on how you count in terms of disease, are preventable or, let's say, reversible to a certain extent. With costs that are a third, a tenth, or whatever of what we're currently paying for the health system, probably less, and we can pay farmers properly with that. And what would you do if you go back to because you led a food company a long time ago? We like to ask this question, not because I think anybody should have $1 billion in terms of concentrated wealth, but let's say that happens. Tomorrow morning, you wake up, it's on your account, but you had to put it to work. Like, it has to be given away, lobbying, but it had to be put to work. And we've had all kinds of answers to this question, obviously, in the 400 episodes we've had. But what would you do if you have the comfortable or uncomfortable task of putting something with 9 zeros to work? Could be very long term, obviously, but what would be your prioritization? What would be your big buckets you would be looking at when you had that kind of resources?
There's just one bucket, really, which is to create modalities of education in countries all over the world. So farmers could get a stipend to come and stay for a week or whatever and listen to other farmers doing exactly what I'm doing with that, which is people learn from their peers. They learn from people they respect, and not as opposed to experts. And the farmers who, and the David Montgomerys as well, but and Anne, and there's just so much wisdom out there, and it's really inaccessible. You are accessing it and making it available. Okay, but how can he or she find the time or the money to actually immerse themselves into being taught by farmers who have all the same problems and face all the same issues that they do and aren't experts in that sense? They are, but experts because of learning. They learned on the job, and the job was being on this farm, and then just sharing. And that is what I wanted to see created in this country, and I like to see it everywhere, from Australia, New Zealand, all the way through Africa. And because people are very open farmers are very open in that sense. If isn't a threat, if it actually helps them have a healthier family and they're not using pesticides, if it's better for their children, if it lowers their costs, which it does, by the way, lowers their inputs, if it increases basically crop health, if it increases the value, if it increases the taste, if it increases the sustainability or viability of their farm, if they can stop having chemicals stacked up in the barn, all those kind of things are really, farmers are very open to it. They really are. I would say the only farms that aren't really are industrial, because there is no farmer. They're like 10, 50,000, 20,000 acre farms owned by some company. That's a harder reach. But most farmers aren't that way. And as I said, by the time I was, in my 20s, I had 35,000, not quite, but 30 plus thousand acres under contract, organically grown food. And I did so by finding these farms, which actually weren't difficult to find, but actually going to the farm and walking the farm with the farmer and getting the family history, the crop history, what they've learned, and so forth. They taught me. I didn't know anything about, my grandfather was a farmer, but I didn't learn anything from anything else except these people. And that mode of learning is ancient and effective, and we don't have it right now because the ag schools got turned out, the buyer people that were basically skeptical of Herb Young, right? And so that's what I would do with $1 billion. And obviously, at some point, they have to be self-sustaining, but you can go a long ways with $1 billion because education is really relatively inexpensive, and it's not a capital sink. And that's what I do. Yeah.
And to a younger self, in that sense, would you start another food company in this era if you had your hands free and you had, say, that energy and time, etc.? Would that be something like you did back in the day, or is that something that is not exciting at the moment? Because we're in that exciting time with consumers shifting, big food companies under a lot of pressure, which means opportunity as well. A lot of farmers are switching; they need places for their differently grown ingredients to go. Is that exciting with your entrepreneur hat on?
What's exciting to me is to see what's going on, just in terms of the food companies, literacy, care, whether it's retail or wholesale or direct. I'm pretty blown out by the rate of understanding and adoption by consumers and customers that's going on in the world right now. Obviously, I see through my own lens. I shop at those stores. I go to those places, so I have a biased point of view. Yeah, I got my bubble. But at least I had the sense of having helped create the bubble in my life. And I just want to make the bubble bigger. And so I find that's what really... And I do it by speaking, writing, and consulting. And I don't think I have some magnificent effect, but I have effects that do ripple out in ways that no one will ever know, that do affect everything from infants to farmers and people who are downstream from farms, which are usually toxic in commercial areas. But at the same time, I just feel like the soil, if you will, is actually a doorway to understanding the entire system of Earth, the biosphere. Because oftentimes we see biosphere as diversity, and we think different birds and different animals and this and that and so forth, and they're perishing and so forth, which is true, and the oceans too. But I actually think that if you give right back to source, that's the highest leverage point. And so soil, it's not just the soil of the farm, it's the soil of the forests, what's happening there. And this idea that you should plant 1 trillion trees and somehow you're going to capture more carbon is, no, don't do that. You plant forests, not trees. And you plant them as you create the conditions for forests. You don't create plantation forests and so forth. So just getting that kind of... You're so familiar with this, so I feel like I'm talking to somebody who's as literate or more so than I in this area, because you have such a broad sweep, but really get down to basics, which is human well-being. I started all this because I had asthma in my life until I was 18, and I changed my diet and my asthma went away, and I was shocked and mad. I was shocked that it went away. It didn't come back. I was shocked that the medical establishment had not done a damn thing I had it from 6 months old, the youngest recorded case of asthma in the county I lived in. And I just thought, oh, give me a break. I went from X to Y in terms of diet, and I don't have asthma. And I had been taking pharmaceuticals for all my life. And when I got to teenager, because I like to play sports and breathing is important, I had to take 3 times the maximum daily dose of aminophylline and ephedrine, which is like speed, and to actually breathe one day. And I recommend to everybody who has good lungs, breathe and just feel that. And I never felt air in the bottom of my lungs until I was 18, 19 years old. Never felt it. I had no idea what that experience was like. So for me, that it was like, you're kidding. It's so simple. It was so simple. Food. And so Erewhon, my food company started because it was so hard to get the food. You had to go to different Chinatown, Japantown, the farmer's market, the Quaker mill. You had to go around town spend a whole day once a week to find the food you wanted to eat. And so I thought it should be available more conveniently to people. But this connection with what we eat, I've been healthy. I shouldn't say this, but I haven't had a disease or sickness since then, okay? And people say, well, what's your secret? I said, there's no secret at all. And so what do you eat? What do you suggest? I said, the reason isn't because of what I eat. It's because of what I don't eat. I'm healthy because of what I don't eat. You could figure this out for yourself, what you do want to eat that's healthy for you. But the fact is that most illness and sickness and pathologies in the world come from what people are eating and imbibing, drinking, or breathing in many cases too, of course. And so it's not so complicated. It's not, here's the diet, works for you. No, it's not that way. It's get rid of all the other stuff and make that transition. It's just like farmers make a transition, getting rid of stuff, and they're doing things that are creative, procreative. And so each of us is the same as a farm. We've been putting junk down our mouths without knowing it in some cases, sometimes knowing it, doesn't matter which. Do the survey, do the understanding, look to others who are before you, that is, that have already made this transition, learn from them, and then you'll figure out what to eat, and you'll figure out what not to eat. Yeah.
I think it's a perfect one to wrap up with. I want to be conscious of your time. We, quote unquote, used quite a bit. I want to end with a deep breath with everyone that can do that. And of course, the wonder of why spheres are round or why drops are round. And to wonder, go out. Hopefully you listen to this on a run, on a walk. I know a lot of people listen to this while being in a tractor, if they're on a farm, picking eggs or grading eggs, being in a garden somewhere, long walks. I hope that this is not behind a screen, because that would be counterintuitive in this case. I want to thank you so much, Paul, for all the work you do and you have done, and of course for taking the time to come here and share some of that. We could do this for hours. I'm very curious how the water and hydrosphere message is landing with food executives. We'll check in with that at some point. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Colin, thank you. And actually, the work you're doing is so inspiring to me. It was a desert 50 years ago. And to know that somebody like you is doing what they've done 400 times with the people that you invite, and with that kind of literacy and understanding, compassion as well, is wondrous and makes me happy and makes me very grateful to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So how did it make you feel, this passionate plea for being outside a lot? It definitely makes me think, even though I would love to, I just don't spend enough time outside, as I spend a lot in front of this marvelous machine that's called a laptop and a microphone and talking to all of you. Sometimes we get to do it outside, but not enough. And what does it make you, for me, really what left with the conversation with Paul is the energy. At that age, I would love to have that 10% of that energy, the optimism, but also because of all of he has seen and the people I've talked to, it's very easy to slip into deep pessimism. Of course, he doesn't do optimism. He says lack of fear from his Buddhist practice, and engaging with the food system, even though he knows how much work there's still to be done on that side, still deeply engaging with food executives, large companies, and bringing them to the most extreme examples and seeing how that lands and how they are moved by that and hopefully get into action, which of course is the most difficult piece. So easy to be inspired by an amazing farm. It's so easy not to not do anything with that. We've all seen that probably. But it reminds me again of how powerful it can be when it works well. So I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it somewhere outside, and hopefully you can stay a bit longer outside also after this is done. Maybe listen to something else, maybe not listen to anything. Just listen to the wind, the trees, the grass, the cows, the insects, whatever you are surrounded with. See you or hear you at the next one. This podcast is part of the Intergenerational Open Geospatial Carbon Registry, OGCR, project, which is funded by the European Union. That is working on the development of a carbon registry, of the modeling of carbon reduction and carbon farming future scenarios, and the demonstration of business cases. The goal: empowering farmers, policymakers, researchers, business managers, investors, and communities across Europe and beyond. OGCR helps to ensure carbon benefits that are shared fairly today and for the generations to come. If you're curious to learn more, you can visit ogcr.eu. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. For show notes and links discussed, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend? And get in touch with us on social media, our website, or via the Spotify app, and tell us what you liked most. And give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or your podcast player. That really, really helps us. Thanks again, and see you next time.